The townsfolk were still laughing when Clara turned to leave, but Daniel did something no one expected. Under the gray sky, in full view of the people who had mocked her, he unbuttoned his shirt and revealed the raw scar that had nearly killed him. His voice didn't tremble as he spoke of a wife lost, a fence post that tore his flesh, and years spent frozen in grief, until a letter from a woman he'd never met changed everything. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Clara Whitmore sat in the narrow beam of dusk light slanting through her parlor window, a pile of opened envelopes resting like tombstones on the desk before her. Her hands, once steady from years of nursing her mother through late-night fever spells and her father's coughing fits, now trembled not from illness, but humiliation. She unfolded another letter, the paper whispering like a sigh too heavy to carry. Dear Miss Whitmore, I appreciate your interest, but I'm looking for someone with more vitality. No offense, but I don't want to marry my aunt. The ink blurred as her eyes watered, but no tears fell. Tears had long become a private indulgence she no longer afforded herself. They had dried up after letter 6, maybe 7. This was letter 24. She had written each response with care, no embellishments, no pretense. Just her, a woman who had given decades to duty and now dared, foolishly perhaps, to reach for something of her own. She included her photo only when asked. Most didn't. Some returned it. One had drawn wrinkles on it in ink. They didn't see Clara. They saw the number, 42, as if it was carved on her forehead like a warning sign. The world of mail-order matchmaking, once romanticized in her imagination as a last refuge for lonely hearts, had shown itself to be as cruel and juvenile as the dances she'd been overlooked at in her 20s. Youth was the currency here, and she was bankrupt. But anger, that rare, almost exotic emotion in her restrained life, now began to stir. It wasn't the sharp burst of rage that some women allowed themselves to feel, to shout, to throw. Clara had never been permitted that luxury. No, hers was a cold, quiet wrath, one that hardened her jaw and kept her spine straight even as the letters cut deeper. She had given her best years to others. And for what? To be told, casually, by strangers, that she was expired? That night, she sat by the lamp and read the ad again, the one that was different. Looking for a woman of strong spirit. Children okay. No need to be young, just kind. She traced those words with her fingertip. They felt clean. No flattery, no hidden jab. Just a man looking for substance. She didn't know him. He hadn't asked for a photo. He hadn't asked for anything, really, just kindness. And kindness, Clara still had in abundance. She reached for her pen. The moment Clara Whitmore stepped down from the train at Wilkes Crossing, the weight of scrutiny settled over her like prairie dust, clinging, choking, inescapable. Her faded blue dress, pressed with care the night before, seemed suddenly too modest, too plain. Her boots, polished to a dull sheen, now looked ancient beside the shiny, patent leather shoes of younger women on the platform. The small trunk she carried, a life's worth of hopes packed into weathered leather, seemed pitiful in the hands of a woman who had dared to dream so late in life. Laughter didn't erupt immediately. It dripped, slow and venomous, a hiss between teeth, a snort disguised as a cough. One woman shielded her smirk behind a lace fan. Another elbowed her friend with exaggerated disbelief. Clara walked forward anyway, each step a silent war cry against the ridicule that buzzed like flies around her. The cruelest blow came from a boy barely 20, his voice loud enough to pierce the station's thin veil of civility. "That's the bride. Poor Dan. Must have gone blind grieving." His friends howled. One even spat in the dirt behind her boots. Clara didn't flinch. but a flame flickered behind her eyes. And then, Daniel. He stood at the edge of the crowd, tall and still, as if carved from the very land itself. His black Stetson hung loosely in his hand, hair tousled by the wind, sunburn etched across the creases of his brow. When their eyes met, a breathless hush fell. For her. Because in that brief, fragile moment, his expression broke open not with shock, not disappointment, but wonder. "Miss Whitmore?" he asked, voice hoarse as if dredged up from some buried place. "Clara," she replied softly, but with strength. Daniel hesitated, glancing at the faces around them, faces full of judgment, of laughter turned curious. And then he offered his hand, not ceremoniously, not possessively, simply, firmly, as one soul greeting another. The gossip did not end that day. It metastasized. Clara became the town's silent sport. Invitations were never extended. Mothers herded their children away when she passed. One girl pointed and whispered, "That's her, the woman who came in a box." Even the grocer weighed her change like it might carry disease. But Clara did not complain. She cooked, she cleaned, she learned how to wrangle horses and patch fences. She braided her hair each morning with quiet dignity and looked each insult in the face with the poise of a woman who had nothing left to prove. Until the day a stranger at the mercantile, loud and smug, called her a desperate hag, and didn't bother to lower his voice. Clara's hands did not shake. She went home, folded her apron, packed her trunk, and waited for nightfall. Clara stood in the barn's wide mouth, the twilight casting her silhouette against bales of hay stacked like monuments to a life she hadn't yet decided to abandon. Her hands, clenched at her sides, betrayed the storm behind her steady voice. "I'm leaving." Daniel Carter, midway through buckling the feed bin, turned sharply. The latch clanged shut. He didn't step closer. Not yet. "Is it the town?" he asked, though he knew the answer. Clara looked down. "It's everything," she whispered. "I thought I could endure the stares, the mockery, the polite silences at church. But I feel like an intruder in my own story. Like I walked into someone else's life and took a seat that wasn't mine." Silence swelled between them, not cruel, but heavy with things unsaid. Then Daniel did something he'd never done in front of her. Wordlessly, he reached for the buttons of his shirt and began to unfasten them, one by one. The motion was slow, deliberate, not of seduction, but revelation. As the fabric parted, Clara saw it. A scar, rough and pale. It crossed his chest just below the collarbone, jagged as lightning frozen in flesh. A healed wound, yes, but one that had left the skin gnarled, the memory raw. "My wife," he said, eyes not on her but on the far wall. "Died 2 winters ago. Horse panicked, bucked. She hit her head on a rock. I ran to her fast as I could, tried to catch her. I didn't." He swallowed. "I tripped on the slick grass and landed on the fence post. Broke 3 ribs and tore open my chest. But none of it mattered. She was already gone." Clara's lips parted, but no words came. He had never spoken of her, not once since she arrived. She had assumed grief lived in his silence, but this was something deeper. This was confession. "I healed," Daniel went on, voice low and almost reverent. "But I never went near that fence again, never touched another woman, not even in thought. Until—" He looked at her then, fully, unflinchingly. "Until a letter arrived, written with such grace I read it twice. Then a woman stepped off a train in a blue dress and didn't flinch when the town mocked her. She just met my eyes." Her throat burned. "You don't owe me words, Daniel. she managed. I don't owe you, he said, stepping forward, but I choose you. Not because I'm grieving, not to replace what I lost, but because when you look at me, I feel like I'm still a man capable of being loved and loving back. The barn was quiet, save for the soft rustle of hay. Hope did not come in a roar. It came in the quiet certainty of his voice, and the scar he bared, not as a wound, but an offering. It rained the morning Clara Whitmore became Clara Carter. Not the heavy, violent kind that split the earth, but a quiet, whispering drizzle that softened the sky and turned the prairie into a silver mirror. There were no satin gowns, no organ music, no crowd packed into pews, just the open land, 3 friends, and the wild scent of damp sagebrush rising like incense from the earth. Clara's dress was simple, cream cotton, hem slightly damp from the walk through the wet grass. Daniel wore his Sunday best, a hand-me-down black suit that tugged at the shoulders. But his eyes, when he looked at her, were richer than any cathedral. He took her hands in his calloused palms and held them like something precious, not fragile. The vows were short, but their meaning rang deeper than scripture. Not promises of perfection, but of presence. Not forever in fairy tales, but forever in fence-mending, harvests, and quiet cups of coffee on cold mornings. When the officiant pronounced them man and wife, a wind swept through the field, tossing Clara's hair across her face. Daniel brushed it back. No kiss followed immediately. Just a smile, tired, tender, full of everything unsaid. They walked home through the wet, boots squelching, fingers laced. But marriage was only the beginning. By autumn, Clara had turned the abandoned shed near the southern fence into a schoolhouse. No one offered to help at first. The same women who once whispered behind fans now watched her with narrowed eyes. But when she opened the doors to girls whose brothers went to school while they were taught nothing but silence, and to boys left behind for not keeping pace, something shifted. Mrs. Carter became a name spoken not with scorn, but gratitude. The pastor's wife, who had once turned her back, brought fresh bread and asked, awkwardly, if her niece might attend. Clara accepted with grace, never once speaking of the past. And Daniel gave her constancy. Each evening he came home from the fields, kissed her temple, and asked about her students. He built her a porch swing that creaked like an old tune when they rocked together beneath the stars. Every evening, like clockwork, he found a new wildflower, dandelions, prairie bells, Indian paintbrush, and tucked it behind her ear with reverence. My miracle came late, he'd whisper, but it came wearing blue. And Clara? She never again questioned the years behind her. Not when she stood tall before a classroom, not when the women of Wilkes Crossing began to quote her, not when little hands reached up to hug her waist, not when, after supper, she kicked off her boots, laughed into the sky, and danced barefoot with her husband in the rain, ageless, radiant, whole.